G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. Today I thought I'd take a little bit of a look, almost like a season preview for the rest of the season, and just discuss some desired outcomes, I guess, or goals, or things we want to see happen in the second half of 2024, now that we've had a chance to take a beat and reflect on the first half. I've done a bit of content, reflect on the first part of the year. I've done a recap. I've done a review of how the talent's gone. I've done a season review almost of the first half of the year. For the record, the part 2 of the young talent review is coming out. I thought I would just prioritize this as a bit of a preview for the rest of the year, and then I will be previewing the Essendon game sometime today. You should get that on the channel. Then later on in the week, I will return to the young talent review. So let's just talk about what we want to see in the second half of the year. So to summarize the first half, I think I more or less concluded that, objectively speaking, and looking at the results, I think we're probably about par for the course for what we should have expected. There's been some really good moments and some really good wins, and that's exciting and really good signs for the future. On the other hand as well, a lot of our improvement has come from some senior players coming back and returning to some of their best form, which is in itself a real big positive. But nonetheless, I probably would stop short of saying, we've massively succeeded in the first half of the year, as well as taking into account the 3 weeks pre-bye. We're a little bit lackluster, and I'm really hoping that, that's not a sign of things to come. Hopefully that was just our mid-season slump, and we return to something a little bit more exciting for the rest of the season, albeit there's a tricky fixture, and it's hard to pick out exactly which games we are a good chance of winning, but nonetheless, I think those games will come. So I've got about 10 or 11 things here that I want to see us achieve or tick off throughout the second half of the season. Getting a certain amount of wins is one thing. Moving up to a certain position on the ladder is not irrelevant, but it's also not materially the main thing that we should be focusing on. We're not aside vying for, contending for the top 8. I do think part and parcel of developing a young list is being competitive, is trying to win games. And I do have a goal, of wins that I want us to achieve this year. But some of the other aspects as well, I've taken a bit more of a long-term view. That being said, let's start off with, I've got 3 different stats here that I want to discuss, and we'll tie into 3 different points, but they're all more or less a stats element of how we're going. So, I think particularly after the Fremantle win, we had back-to-back wins. We had a big win over Richmond. We had a massive win over Fremantle. That was awesome. At the time, I remember discussing the contested possession stat and how that related to us specifically, because we had gone from being one of the worst contested ball sides over a number of years to being the second best of the competition at that moment in time. And as we heard at the start of the preseason, a lot of what our new style and game plan would be centered around, alongside better ball movement and a bit more daring play, particularly through the corridor. It was going to start with contested possession. It'd be through improved pressure on the opposition and the opposition ball carrier, and also being able to play a little bit more front half footy. So the stats that more or less relate to that. First of all, contested possessions. Now, like I said, we were second in the league at the time I made that video post Derby. And unfortunately, we have dropped down back to third last in the competition for this stat, which is reflective of the ladder. And we are also ahead of Richmond and North Melbourne. Again, there is a correlation to the ladder there. So I suppose specifically in contested ball, which has been a feature of us in our best wins, I would really like to see us improve in this stat. We're clearly third last, and given the age profile of Richmond and North Melbourne, we have a more mature team. The expectation should be high. We should be ahead of those teams. It would be nice to see that become a more prominent feature of our game, and we can execute that more consistently through the second half of the year. So that's a big one for me. I think just elevating from above bottom 4 for that stat needs to be a focus ideally for the second half of the year. We're also distantly third last for scores from stoppage and scores from turnover. In both stats, the only teams we're ahead of are Richmond and North Melbourne, and in both stats, there's a big gap between us and the next worst team of that stat. So in particular, I've referenced this video before, but I did make a video in the preseason at how we were historically poor at scores from stoppage last year. I think we were 7 times worse than the next worst side in North Melbourne. And for us to be sitting third last is actually not bad in that sense. We've come a long way, albeit, again, the expectation has to come. We've had a better injury run. We've had a pretty fit Elliot Yeo playing some of his best footy. I still think there's a lot of growth that we can achieve in this area, both scores from stoppage and scores from turnover, to be honest. So considering we are so distantly third last, I would just like us to see us close that gap. If we can leapfrog another team, that'd be great. Those are just little wins that I think we can aim for. The other thing that's also worth mentioning, we are ranked 18th in the league for possession differential. We're also ranked 18th in the league for tackles. So when we discuss pressure and that being the forefront of our game, if we're conceding more possession than any other team in the comp and tackling less, there's a horrible relationship there. We do note that we are 4th in the league for pressure acts. Now, pressure acts is a bit of an iffy stat, and again, there's really no great correlation with the ladder. Like some of the teams that rank highly for pressure acts are generally pretty low on the ladder, and I wonder if that's because you get a pressure act for getting close to laying a tackle, but not quite achieving it. I'm not too sure exactly what the deal is there. I think Richmond are pretty high for pressure acts as well. And I do think our pressure in general is, a lot better, although not consistent for 4 quarters. And we have seen when we dropped off, we do concede a lot of goals at the same time. But either way, I think the equation there that we've got to solve is clear. First of all, we'd like to spend more time during the game with the ball in our hands and not theirs, but we also want to make sure we're laying tackles, and we are pretty poor for this stat. So that's a pretty stats heavy focus for the first little part of this video. We'll move on to some more broader things. Now, the other one I've got is probably just figuring out the ruck forward combination. I've referenced this a lot in the last few videos. So obviously, recruit Matthew Flynn. Bailey Williams has a preseason as a forward, comes back into playing the number 1 ruck role, supported by Jack Williams for the most part this year. Jack Williams has played 10 games. I know Harry Barnett got a game in there as well. Now Flynn is back, and it's probably just pushed Bailey Williams back into this position that he trained for in the preseason, but hasn't really played, meaningful minutes in that role for some time. So whatever way, shape, or form, we need to figure out the best method to use our tools, because Jack Williams has been pretty damn good, to be honest. Like for I think a 3rd-year ruck, or ruck forward, I should say. The development he's shown, I'm pretty happy with. But regardless, we need to figure this out, because at the moment, it feels like we're carrying an extra tool and we're not really getting that upside. So I'm willing to be patient. I would just like us to come to a point where Matthew Flynn is building up and playing well as the number 1 ruck, and Bailey is starting to impact the game more as a forward. Now, my best case scenario is that we do make the Flynn and Bailey Williams combo work. I think it would probably be less than ideal if Bailey Williams loses his spot to, say, a Jack Williams. Now, that might mean that Jack Williams has had a great year, but I think our best case scenario is Bailey Williams, who is 24, and in my opinion, still has the talent to play as a forward. Probably not as an accomplished forward as a Jack Williams in terms of potential, but I think, with his athleticism and his ability to take contested marks now has come a long way. He needs to find a way over the course of the season to really grow into that role, because I think that's an important long-term thing for us. I will also note that when Bailey Williams was number 1 ruck again this year, I think there was been a clear drop-off from last season's output, and we actually rank last in the league for hit-outs to advantage, which is quite telling. But hopefully we figure this out, and we get the ideal result of Flynn and Williams, or Bailey Williams, working together in that team, and then we have Jack Williams playing well on the waffle. That's our best case scenario, and I think it's an important thing for us to hopefully get right this year. The next thing I would like us to achieve, if you want to call it that, for the second half of the year is genuinely see growth from one of our non-primary key position defenders. Those being Jeremy McGovern and Tom Barrass. Obviously, those are the two that in the prime of their career, or at the back end, if you like, but playing good footy nonetheless, important players to us. That third tall role, I would like to see us have some meaningful growth from whatever player is in that position. Now, in my opinion, I would like it to be one of Harry Edwards or Callum Jamieson. I think Josh Rotham, stylistically, as a third tall defender, probably suits that role the most, but I'm thinking longer term. If you watch the channel regularly, I do reference, what I think of our young key position depth, and in the back half specifically. And, I think it would be a real good win for us throughout the second half of the year if someone like a Harry Edwards or a Callum Jamieson, if he returns to the side, demonstrates that long-term ability to be a decent AFL listed key position defender. I think that would be a very important win for us this year if we can achieve that. Have Harry Edwards, who's currently in the side, I'm not sure if he'll stay in the side for Essendon, or Callum Jamieson really develop in that role and show us that they might be here longer term. That is something, as our list transition starts to take shape, that's something important for us. It's also important for us to get Rhett Bazzo on the park. I know that we don't really control this, this comes down to his body, but the last update from the injury update that we have is he's 3 or 4 weeks away, more or less starting to build his loads after a groin injury. Oh, that sounded gross. For him, I don't think AFL's on the cards at all this year. Get him back into the waffle by the end of the year, because I still think he is, a relatively important prospect for us, and I do think he has AFL level talent. So moving on as well, what's the other thing we want to see this year? I think in the second half of the year, selection integrity needs to, be upheld. So as I currently record this, I know that someone like a Dom Sheed has been ruled out this week with a hamstring injury. And I guess what I'm referring to here is being bold enough to drop these senior players if they're not performing well. I think that's got to be important. I think more or less we're all pretty aligned on this. And, if it comes down to a senior player who's performing very moderately and a young player with some potential that is also performing moderately, I'd like to see a continued stance of upholding the young talent and keeping an eye on the transition of this list. And to some extent, we have done this. Andrew Gaff played 1 game at the start of this year, then was dropped, and he came back into the side as soon as we started to have some midfield injuries, and I'm comfortable with where that sits. But it'll be interesting from this point. Jaden Hunt comes back into the side this week. Dom Sheed obviously misses through injury. Tim Kelly's still going to be at least a week away with that hip flexor injury. But as Kelly comes back, as Harley Reid comes back, and of course Jaden Hunt, it'd be very interesting to see the stance they take on someone like a Dom Sheed or an Andrew Gaff. Now, we still need to preserve a good amount of young talent in this team. And like I said, I'm comfortable with how the selection has gone so far. I don't think there's too many players that have been left to rot in the waffle too long. And equally, I don't think we've left too many players in the senior side that have been underperforming. Part of this is the fact that, someone like a Sheed, who is one of the first names we think of when we think of senior players that are not quite contributing what they used to. He has been injured for most of this year so far. So it'd be interesting to see once everyone's fully fit, if that time ever actually occurs, how does the integrity hold up of selection when we've got a Sheed versus a Cully or something like that. So I think we all know what I'm saying here. I'd like to see us continue to preserve the amount of young talent we have in our team. And if that means making a harsh call on Gaff or Sheed, then I think that's the position we're in, because we do need to make progress in this area throughout the rest of this year. This is a development year, and we need to make the most of that. So flowing on from that point, it'd be nice to see more debuts. And I don't know if this is necessarily a goal or an objective, but I think we would like to see it, right? So we've had, as far as I can tell, 5 debuts this season. Harley Reid, Locke Rawlinson, Harvey Johnston, Tyrell Dewar, and most recently Jack Hutchinson. And that's solid, considering around now we've had second and third year players come back into the side. We've seen obviously Jinby and Chester. Those guys have been pretty established in the best 22. Jack Williams has played 10 games. Ryan Marrick's played just about every game he's been fit for, if I'm not mistaken. Even Harry Barnett's come back into the side. Zane True's come back. So I think, if we were going to add any debuts, I guess it would just be nice to see someone earn a debut. And I think Clay Hall has been, fairly consistently rock solid in the waffle without necessarily banging the door down. And, he's probably the most obvious candidate of a player who hasn't debuted yet to earn a debut in the second half of the year. And it would be nice to see, even if it's not necessarily something I'd put an objective on. Because if it's not a debut, I would also like to see one youngster who's maybe debuted and come back out to re-earn their spot. I think that would be as equally pleasing for me as someone like a Clay Hall earning his first game. So that could be Dewar, it could be Johnston, it could be Hutchinson, or even Rawlinson. So those are 4 players there that have got a taste, gone back out. If they can re-earn their spot, that would be equally pleasing to me. The next 2 candidates that are most likely probably are Bergiel and Baker, and it doesn't really feel like either are really close to getting a debut. Having said that, both are out of contract at the end of the year. Sometimes we see footy clubs, and we've seen West Coast do it, randomly give a game to a guy that probably didn't earn that spot to see what he has at AFL level. So I would probably expect we will see maybe a big Bergiel this year. And if we do see him, it might be one of those things where it's like, show us what you got, or you're probably not getting another contract. But either way, more fresh talent, more young talent, whether it be someone who's debuted or someone who has yet to play. Now, the second last one that I've got here is just a clean bill of health for youngsters. Now, this is firmly in the things I want to see, not goals, because obviously nobody is not wanting to have a clean bill of health. So it's not really a goal. It's something a little bit out of your control to some extent. But it'd be really great to see a continued extended run for Harley Reid, Ruben Jinby, Hoff, Chesser, Marrick. And I think, other than Reid, who's really exploded onto the scene, and maybe a Hoff who really has elevated, whether or not we see any of these guys explode throughout the course of the year, it will set them up better next year. Chesser's played 27 games. If he goes into next year, 35 plus, somewhere between 35 and 40, I think Jinby's around about that mark. Hoff will be around the 50 game mark. I think Marrick's played 20 plus games now as well. You start to push that up to 30 to 40, and that's where players really start to take their game to the next level. So a bit of a redundant point, but it is important, more so than maybe some senior players, keeping the young guys healthy, keeping them exposed, getting some continuity. I think we've seen development from these guys. It will set them up longer term and make them better footballers. And I will actually include Elijah Hewitt into this. Now, similar to Bazzo, they're on a similar timeline. Neither of them have played a single game this year, both listed as 3 or 4 weeks. Hewitt's now listed as being back in main training and expected to return to the waffle within a month. Now, what does that put us at? Round 19 in the AFL, and that will probably put us at 13 games in the waffle. It feels like there's constantly waffle buys. So I don't know, does that give Hewitt a month, maybe 5 weeks in the waffle? I'm not really forecasting any possibility he comes into the AFL side. That would be whack. It's possible, I suppose, if they throw him a game at the end of the year. But for me, I think if he gets in, goes into the waffle and is able to build minutes as a forward midfielder first, and then genuinely a midfielder towards the end of the year, there's still a lot of value he can get out of this year. And probably one of our most important young talents, if you're asking me. Which then leads to the waffle side, and I just would say that more wins in the waffle side. I think we've demonstrated some growth, as you'd expect. We've had some uncompetitive performances, but for the most part, when we've played well, we've played really well in the waffle, which is really pleasing to see, considering we do have a handicap in that competition. We don't have the same access to mature age players to support the AFL listed ones. The AFL listed ones playing in the waffle are all kids anyway, and they're supported by amateurs. So to have 3 wins, that's pretty decent. We'd like to obviously reduce the losses, and we'd like to continue to foster an environment where the young guys can play and play well and build confidence and actually develop in a team that's not getting walloped. And it's probably been steady so far this year, but I do think it's key that we continue to have these wins. So I think I've listed 10 things there. So overall, what do we want in terms of a win-loss ratio? Now, I'm not too concerned with whether we finish second last or third last. To be honest, it'd be great to have a great end of the year, get some wins and finish second last. That would be, the ultimate season, to be honest. Naturally, because, I've got one eye on the draft, as most of us probably will, being Eagles fans right now. But I think 6 wins should be something we should aim for, to be honest. I think that would demonstrate meaningful improvement. 5 wins would probably be acceptable, but it wouldn't be quite as good as 6. I know that sounds silly, but I think 6 wins should be the goal. If that's second or third last, who cares? One thing this season's given us, even if there hasn't been necessarily a Hawthorn-like run where a lot of their young talents are starting to click. We've had a few, obviously Harley Reid and, a number of other young players who have played well, when they're not necessarily driving that improvement other than Harley. Nonetheless, though, what this season has provided us is some moments and wins. And, a lot of them do include Harley Reid, but it was like Jake Waterman, stuff that's exciting, winning a derby, a big rivalry game. That sort of stuff, I think it will build cohesion with the team. If we're playing well in exciting wins. It's good for morale, it's good for development, and, it kind of creates, without getting too woohoo, it will create bonds in the team as well if they've got good memories. I'm sure the Western Derby, the Richmond win, the Melbourne win will create memories with this young group. Gives them a taste of success, and it gives something to strive for. And, maybe we don't need to win too many more games, but if we are playing our brand and getting close, I think back to the way we finished 2023 in the final round of the year where we played against Adelaide. Now, on paper, we lost that game by 6 or 7 goals or something like that, but it was a farewell game for 2 to 3 legends, and, the way we played that game with such spirit, the disappointment when we lost, that's the energy I'd like us to really capture in the second half of this year. We're not going to do it week in, week out, but I felt really positive after that final round loss. So if we can at least play that brand of footy consistently, or more consistently, I don't think consistently is ever going to be realistic right now with this team. But that energy, that spirit, that desire to win, we do want to see that. We want to see more memories and, make this a fun season. And there's a little bit of a negative stank about where we're at the moment. I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting that onto you. Maybe that's just the way I feel because the last 3 weeks haven't been so great. But hopefully in the second half of the year, we achieve, hopefully all of these things and get some real progress out of it, but also the memories. We want some good memories. We had some good ones this year. Let's finish the year off strong. So let me know in the comments, guys, what are some things you want to see from these mighty Eagles in the second half of the year? What are some goals that you want us to tick off or whatever it may be? I thank you for watching. I thank you for being subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.